I never expected to see my former teacher again, but when she leaned closer and whispered, "Don't tell anyone," I realized she was about to let me in on a secret that would change both of our lives. I hadn't thought about her in years. Not really. She existed in my memory the way most teachers do, tied to chalkboards and late afternoons when the classroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. But that day, standing in line at the little independent bookstore downtown, I heard her voice before I saw her. It was softer than I remembered, less formal, but it carried the same gentle steadiness that used to calm a room full of restless students. When I turned, I froze. There she was. She stood a few steps ahead, holding a novel pressed against her chest, her other hand tugging absent-mindedly at the strap of her bag. Time had changed her, but not in the way I would have expected. Her hair, darker at the roots, caught the light in warm streaks, and faint lines had formed near her eyes, not harsh, but graceful, like soft brush strokes. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't fade, even when years pass. For a moment, I just watched, debating whether to say something. Would she even remember me? When she turned slightly and caught my eye, I knew the answer. Her face lit with recognition. "Daniel?" she said, tilting her head with that familiar curious look I'd seen 100 times when she waited for someone to answer a question. I smiled, a little awkwardly. "Yeah. It's been, wow, a long time." The line moved, but neither of us noticed right away. She stepped aside, letting others pass, her attention fixed on me. We started with the usual small talk, how long it had been, what I was doing now, how she was keeping busy. But beneath the polite words, I felt something stirring, a spark of admiration that had grown into something deeper over the years. She laughed softly at one point, and I realized I'd forgotten how warm that sound was. It wasn't the laughter of a teacher trying to keep order. It was gentler, almost tired, but genuine. I noticed things I never would have as a teenager. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she grew self-conscious, the quiet steadiness in her eyes, the careful choice of words that revealed more than she probably intended. Standing there, I felt strangely anchored. Like no matter how much time had passed, she was still someone who had the power to make me stop and really listen. By the time we left the shop, either of us seemed eager to say goodbye. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint smell of roasted coffee from the cafe next door. She adjusted the strap of her bag, hesitated, then said with a smile, "Maybe we'll run into each other again." A week later, we did run into each other again. This time it wasn't chance. She had suggested coffee after our brief meeting at the bookstore, and I'd agreed without hesitation. We met at a quiet cafe tucked into the corner of an old street. It had the kind of atmosphere that seemed built for secrets: soft lamplight, the hum of low conversations, and the smell of cinnamon baked into the walls. She was already seated when I walked in, her coat draped neatly over the chair, her hands folded around a steaming cup. "Daniel," she said, her eyes lighting with recognition again. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it," I replied, maybe too quickly, and her smile softened in a way that made me glad I had. At first, our conversation drifted around safe topics: the books we were reading, people we remembered from school, the weather that had finally turned toward autumn. But I could tell something pressed at the edge of her thoughts. She held her cup tightly, her fingers tapping against the ceramic in a rhythm she probably didn't notice. Then, in a quieter tone, she said, "I'm not teaching anymore." The words surprised me. In my memory, teaching was part of who she was: steady, patient, unshakable. I leaned closer. "Really? When did you decide to step away?" Her eyes flickered down, then back up, as though she weighed how much she wanted to reveal. She hesitated, then leaned toward me slightly, lowering her voice. "Don't tell anyone. Not yet, anyway. Most people don't know. But I needed to stop. For my own peace of mind." The phrase "don't tell anyone" wasn't conspiratorial. It was fragile. A quiet confession she wasn't ready to share with the world. In that moment, I felt the trust she had placed in me settle between us like something rare and delicate. I didn't push. I simply nodded. "I understand." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, almost as if she hadn't expected me to take it so easily. Everyone assumes I left because of retirement, or something else. But the truth is, I was tired. I'd given so much of myself to that job. And I realized one day that I didn't have much left for me. As she spoke, her voice softened, almost breaking. I noticed how the lamplight caught the edges of her hair, how her shoulders seemed to relax just a little as she finally let the words out. "You don't have to explain," I said gently. "Sometimes stepping away is the strongest choice you can make." Her eyes met mine then, holding for just a moment longer than polite conversation required. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Her hand brushed against my sleeve as she reached for her cup again, a small touch, fleeting, but enough to send a quiet warmth through me. For the rest of the evening, our conversation felt different. Less like a reunion, more like the beginning of something new, drawn together not by chance, but by the secret she had chosen to share with me. After that night, things seemed to unfold almost naturally, as if either of us had to force the next step. She sent me a short message a few days later, just a casual line about sorting through boxes in her attic and how she could use an extra pair of hands. It wasn't framed as an invitation, exactly, but I understood what she meant. And I went without hesitation. Her house sat at the edge of town, older but well kept, with ivy trailing lazily across the brick and a small garden in the front where late autumn flowers struggled against the chill. When she opened the door, she wasn't dressed like the teacher I remembered, no tidy blazers or skirts. Instead, she wore a soft sweater, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and jeans faded at the knees. It was disarming in the best way. She looked comfortable, real, almost younger in that moment. "Thank you for coming," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I wasn't sure you'd actually want to spend your Saturday lifting boxes with me." I grinned. "I've survived worse. Besides, you bribed me with the promise of coffee." Her laugh came easily this time, light and genuine, and she led me upstairs. The attic was filled with the sort of clutter that builds over a lifetime: stacks of books, photo albums, old furniture covered with sheets. As we worked side by side, dust hanging in the air like soft smoke, I found myself studying the little details about her I had never noticed before. The way she hummed absent-mindedly while flipping through an old yearbook. How she paused to read the notes in the margins of her favorite novels, smiling at the memories. "Look at this," she said at one point, holding up a faded photograph of herself as a young teacher, standing in front of her very first classroom. Her hair was shorter then, her smile wider, unguarded. She shook her head softly. "Feels like another lifetime. You still look the same," I said before I could stop myself. She glanced at me, her expression caught between surprise and something else, something warmer. For a moment, the air seemed to still around us. Then she broke the silence with a playful roll of her eyes. "Flattery won't get you out of carrying that box." Hours passed without either of us noticing. We worked, we talked, and we laughed more than I thought we would. At one point, she handed me a mug of coffee in the kitchen, and when our fingers brushed, either of us pulled away immediately. The touch lingered, small, unspoken, but charged with a quiet electricity I couldn't ignore. By the time I left that evening, the distance between teacher and former student felt like it had thinned, replaced by something more human, more personal. And though nothing had been said aloud, I knew I wanted to see her again. The next time we met wasn't planned. I was walking downtown one evening when I spotted her sitting by the window of a quiet cafe, a half-empty cup of tea beside her and a book open in her hands. She looked peaceful, but there was also a hint of solitude in the way she leaned her cheek against her palm, her eyes skimming the page without much focus. I hesitated at first, unsure if I should interrupt, but when she looked up and caught sight of me, her face brightened. She waved me over, and within minutes I found myself sitting across from her, the glow of the table lamp softening the lines of her face. Conversation came easily, as it always did. We spoke of small things at first, the weather turning colder, the latest book she was reading, my own struggles with work. But then, in a quiet pause, she set her cup down and looked at me with an expression that felt heavier, more deliberate. "You know," she began, her voice softer than usual, "sometimes I wonder if this is appropriate. You and I sitting here like this." I blinked, taken aback. "Appropriate?" She gave a half smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Daniel, I'm not blind. There's a difference between us. A rather obvious one." Her words lingered in the air, drawing my attention to what she didn't say outright: the years between us. The age gap that had been quietly present all along, yet unspoken until now. I leaned back, searching for the right response. "I don't see it the way you do," I said honestly. "You're someone I enjoy spending time with. That's all that matters to me." Her lips curved into a faint smile at my sincerity, but I could see the conflict still flickering in her eyes. She lifted her tea again, cradling it between her palms as if for comfort. "I've lived a lot of life already," she murmured. "I've made mistakes, carried regrets. I don't want to pull someone else into that. Especially someone younger, who might not understand." Her vulnerability touched me more deeply than she realized. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her she wasn't a burden, that her presence was something I valued, not something I felt dragged down by. Instead, I reached across the small table. My hand stopped just short of hers, hovering in the space between us. She noticed. I saw her breath catch ever so slightly, but she didn't pull away when I finally let my fingertips brush against hers. The contact was subtle, restrained, but the effect was undeniable. Her eyes lifted to mine, a mixture of hesitation and longing shining through. For a moment, the noise of the cafe faded, leaving only the quiet thrum of my heartbeat and the warmth of her skin beneath my touch. She didn't move her hand, but she didn't press it firmly against mine either. It was as though she was allowing herself just enough closeness to feel what was there, without fully giving in. When we finally parted that evening, the tension still hung in the air, unresolved, but undeniable. And as I walked away, I realized the age gap wasn't just a question of numbers. It was the weight of perception, of fear, of possibility. And neither of us yet knew how much it would matter. The air between us had shifted after that evening in the cafe. We didn't speak directly about what had passed between us, the brush of hands, the unspoken hesitation, but it lingered, coloring every moment we shared after. One Saturday, she invited me over again, this time not for boxes or heavy lifting, but for something quieter. "I could use some company," she said simply. "I've been working on the garden out back. It's nice this time of year." When I arrived, the late afternoon sun was spilling gold across her backyard. The garden was modest but beautiful, filled with climbing roses and herbs tucked neatly in pots. She was kneeling near the soil, her hair tied back loosely, a pair of gloves already smudged with earth. She looked up when she saw me, smiling in that soft, almost shy way that always seemed to catch me off guard. "Glad you came," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "I was beginning to think you'd find a better excuse for your Saturday." "As if I would," I teased, and she laughed, shaking her head. We worked side by side for a while, watering plants, trimming leaves, sharing the kind of easy silence that didn't need to be filled. At one point she paused, her hand brushing over the petals of a rose as if she were reminding herself how delicate things could be. "You know," she said quietly, still looking at the flower, "it's been a long time since I've let someone in like this. Into my space. Into my quiet." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I knelt beside her close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. "I'm glad you did," I said finally, my voice low but certain. She turned then, meeting my gaze. For a moment, neither of us looked away. There was something unspoken in her eyes, a vulnerability, but also a quiet desire for connection she couldn't quite name. When she reached across to hand me the small watering can, her fingers lingered over mine. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't rushed. Just the simplest of touches, but filled with meaning. The warmth of her hand spread through me, steady and grounding, and though the moment lasted only a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world had slowed around us. Later, as the sun dipped lower and painted the sky in streaks of pink and orange, we sat on her porch with mugs of tea, watching the light fade. Conversation softened into silences, and in one of those silences, she reached out again, laying her hand gently over mine. "Thank you," she murmured, almost too quietly to hear. "For being here. For listening." I didn't move. I let her hand rest over mine, steady and warm, and in that moment I understood that whatever this was, whatever name we gave it, it mattered to her. And to me. When I left that evening, she hugged me at the door. It wasn't hurried or polite. Her arms slipped around my waist, her cheek resting briefly against my chest, and for the first time I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against mine. And I knew I wanted to feel that again. It was a rainy evening when everything quietly shifted. She had invited me over again, not for work this time, but simply for dinner. "Nothing fancy," she had said over the phone, her voice carrying that soft warmth that always seemed to reach me no matter the distance. By the time I arrived, rain streaked down her windows in silver trails, the sound filling the house with a steady rhythm. She greeted me at the door in a loose cardigan, her hair pulled back but with a few strands escaping to frame her face. The smell of something warm and comforting, roasted chicken, fresh herbs, filled the air. Dinner was simple, but we lingered over it, our conversation weaving between laughter and thoughtful silences. Afterward, she suggested we sit in the living room. A lamp cast a golden glow across the space, leaving the rest of the room in gentle shadow. We sat close, shoulders almost touching, the rain tapping softly against the glass. For a while, we just listened to the storm. Then, almost out of nowhere, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I wasn't expecting this," she said, staring at her hands clasped in her lap. "Expecting what?" I asked gently. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her sleeve. "To feel this close to someone again. To feel understood. It's been a long time since I've let myself have that." I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I let her words hang in the air, heavy but tender. Finally, I said, "You don't have to explain. I get it. I feel it too." Her eyes lifted to mine, hesitant but searching. The silence between us grew thick with something unsaid, something both of us had been circling around for weeks. When I shifted closer, our shoulders touched fully this time. Neither of us moved away. The small contact felt like the most natural thing in the world, yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken. Her breath caught softly, and she turned her head toward me. Her hair brushed against my cheek, delicate and fleeting, but it sent a rush of warmth through me. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling just slightly. "Afraid of what this means. Of what people might think. Of what I might lose if I let it go too far." I swallowed, steadying my voice. "I don't need anything more than this right now. Just being here with you, it's enough. And if it becomes more, we'll figure it out together." Slowly. Her hand lifted then, almost unsure, before resting on my arm. The warmth of her touch seeped through me, grounding me in the moment. She didn't let go. We sat like that for a long while, the storm outside, the lamplight between us, her hand steady on mine. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a kiss. But it was an admission, quiet and certain. We had both stepped across an invisible line. And neither of us wanted to step back. The weeks that followed carried a gentler rhythm. We didn't rush. We didn't define anything. But the closeness between us had shifted into something undeniable. One evening, she suggested a walk. "The air's too heavy in the house," she said with a smile. "Let's stretch our legs before the nights get too cold." The sun was slipping toward the horizon as we stepped outside, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. The neighborhood was quiet, only the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. For a while, we walked in comfortable silence, our arms brushing every so often, each touch sending a quiet reminder of what we were becoming. Eventually, she slowed and stopped beneath a street lamp, its glow circling us in a pool of light. She looked at me then, her expression tender but serious. "Daniel," she began, her voice steady but low, I've spent so much time worrying. About the years between us. About the way others might see this. About whether I even deserve something like this at this stage in my life. I listened, giving her the space to say everything she needed. Her eyes softened as she added, "But every time you're here, all those worries fade. You make it feel simple. Like maybe it doesn't have to be so complicated after all." I stepped closer, close enough that the lamplight caught the strands of her hair and the quiet rise and fall of her breath. "It doesn't," I said gently. "We don't need to have all the answers right now. We just need to choose this, whatever it is, together." For a moment she didn't speak. Instead, she reached for my hand. Her fingers slipped into mine slowly, deliberately, as though testing how it felt to let herself hold on. The warmth of her palm against mine was steady, grounding, like it belonged there. We continued walking, our hands linked naturally now. And though no one else was around to see, the gesture felt braver than any grand declaration. When we reached her house again, she paused at the gate, turning to me with a small, wistful smile. Then, with a softness that caught me off guard, she leaned her head against my shoulder. The world seemed to still in that moment, the cool night air, the faint hum of crickets, the glow of her porch light just ahead. I breathed in the faint scent of her hair, felt the quiet weight of her leaning into me, and realized that her secret hadn't been about leaving teaching, or the garden, or even the loneliness she carried. The real secret she had let me into was her heart. We stood like that for a long time, saying nothing, needing nothing more than the warmth of closeness. And though no promises were spoken aloud, I knew we had made one, to move forward slowly, carefully, but together. A quiet promise. And for us, that was enough.